with most of these hordes are running, 300 to 500 points. So it's a fairly even match when we look at the point cost. But yeah, it's up to the player to decide, what's better. I don't know. We'd have to hit the table to see.
The main argument isn't so much which one is better, but which one is better in what situation. I think there are times when Skarak is MVP easy on the board, but honestly, I think there are times, I don't care about Skarak as a Stormcast player because I don't have as high of a model count as everyone else. I mean, to me, he's just another behemoth that needs to die.
That's what makes the game fun. If there were one model that we're going to stomp over everything else every single time, it wouldn't be interesting. All right, moving on. Death.
Oh, death, oh, death, oh, death, won't you spare me over another? But what is this that I can't see with ice cold hands taking hold of me? When God is gone and the devil takes hold, who have mercy on your soul, death.
This is a faction I understand we have a little bit of a love for in the area. Let's talk about them.
So Death has a lot of battle line choices, and I kind of wanted to talk about... I wanted to do a comparison between zombies and skeletons, but then I also wanted to talk about dire wolves, because they are considered a battle line unit, and they are actually the same cost as zombies, but you get half as many, but they're actually a lot more durable. So if we start with dire wolves, they're 320 points for 30 of them, with the discount. That's our disclaimers, that everything's with the discount. They have 2 wounds apiece, though. They can move 10 inches, and they have a 5-up save, which can actually become a 4-up save if you have them within 9 inches of a corpse card. So now you have a horde that's as tanky as an elite unit, and they make 2 attacks each, except for the alpha, who makes 3. So they're also packing 61 attacks, if I'm doing the math right, and they can be summoned. They also have Slavering Charge, which can add 1 to their wound rolls if they made a charge move in the same turn, which would make them hit on 4s, wound on 3s with the buff. But they don't have any rend, and they just do a damage apiece. I think that's really interesting to have a horde unit that's this tanky and this fast. I think you can really do some damage with dire wolves. Okay, and as I said earlier, zombies, for 60 of them is 320 points. They are really interesting. They are, I believe, don't quote me on this, I believe no other unit can have as many units as them. And they also have an awesome ability where, say you have a unit of 15 that got beat up earlier and a unit of 20 that's, still fresh, you can actually merge them in any kind of combination. So you can consolidate units basically as you're playing, which I think is really awesome for a concept. Because let's be honest, a unit of 4 horde units is usually no good to anybody. They also have a standard bearer, which is kind of just Death's thing. The standard bearer for them lets you return d6 slain models at the start of each hero phase. So they regenerate themselves. You can have one of them be a noisemaker, which guarantees a 6-inch charge or higher. And then they have an ability called Drag Down and Torn Apart. And this is, you add 1 to the hit and wound rolls for a unit of zombies of 10. For 20, you get 2, and for 30, you get 3. And they normally hit and wound on 6s, so I think at first glance, a lot of people think they're really bad. But a unit of 30 is actually hitting and wounding on 3s, and then if they're next to a corpse cart, they actually get +1 to hit again. So they can actually be hitting on 2s, wounding on 3s, and they only get an attack each, but 60 attacks, hitting on 2s, wounding on 3s is pretty deadly.
Yeah, that's not garbage. That's going to kill pretty much anything.
Skeletons, on the other hand, are a little bit more... I want to say advanced, but I don't feel like that's really the right word. With dire wolves or zombies, you don't really get to pick your weapons. But with skeleton warriors, you can actually do a little bit of shenanigans while still keeping really awesome tricks. I say that because you can actually have your front line of skeletons with swords, which have a 1-inch reach, and then you can put the back line with spears and actually allow the back line to hit 2. So it gives them a lot more surface area to deal with and actually do their damage. They're also cheaper than zombies or direwolves. You can have 40 of them for 280 points with the discount. They have the same standard bearer of regeneration. They have the same hornblower to guarantee at least 6-inch charges. If they're within range of a death hero, 18 inches, they can add 1 to their hit rolls, which would make them hit on 3s, wound on 4s for the blades, and hit on 4s, wound on 4s for the spears. You can also give them crypt shields, which will let you have a 5-up save instead of a 6-up save, which can be pretty helpful. I should mention that all 3 of these horde units can also be summoned.
Excellent. Sounds like the skeletons are more for players that are going to be fiddling around with their positioning, and they're going to take a few more moments per model to play, but you might get a little more utility out of them if you're really focused on model position and all that nonsense.
I also wanted to bring up, with summoning, you basically have usually 10, or if you roll really well, you can summon up to 20 units a turn. These discounts for summoning aren't really useful because you can't summon 60 zombies or you can't summon 40 skeletons in a single shot unless you have Nagash, who allows doubling of summonings. But with something like zombies, you can actually summon 20 at a time, or maybe if you have Nagash, you can actually get that 40 summon, and then next turn summon again, and then condense the unit and get all of those amazing buffs. So I think that's kind of a plus point for zombies and a little bit of a minus point to the other ones. But I do think for base value, probably either direwolves or skeletons might be the way to go.
And even if you're only summoning 10 or 20 zombies, you can merge those into a unit that's already on the board to rebolster your ranks and keep those big bonuses.
We didn't really want to just pick one of the Morcharks or Nagash because obviously they're amazing. Pretty much all of the Morcharks can do something really awesome that honestly I have a hard time deciding on which behemoth or leader I would ever want to run. So I decided, because I brought it up in a previous episode, I wanted to actually talk about the Morngul because he's outrageously strong and he has been slightly nerfed this edition, but not really in a way that's going to matter that much.
Awesome, let's get into it.
So the Morngul is 10 wounds, a 3-up save, 10 bravery, which isn't really that relevant. He can move 12 and can fly. So he's going places, and he's going places fast. He has Devourer of Flesh and Souls, which allows him to heal D3 wounds for each combat phase as long as he has killed something. He also has Ghastly Apparition, which just for being within 6 inches of him, you have to subtract 1 from hit rolls for any attacks that are made against him.
That sounds really solid, especially useful against those hordes that don't hit very well.
He's also got Haunter of the Dark, which is basically a 5-up invuln save to even like mortal wounds. So a little bit of 40k talk for you guys. Where the Morngul actually got nerfed is he has an attack characteristic based on how many wounds he has. And it's basically every 3 wounds you put on him knocks him down a tier. Every 2 or 3. He starts with 8 attacks, hitting on 3s, wounding on 3s, with a -1 rend and 2 damage. But for every 6 you roll when you're hitting, generates another attack. And originally, before the rule of 1 specifically mentioned it, you could have his attacks generate theoretically forever, as long as you kept rolling 6s. And now with the rule of 1 allowing for additional attacks to not generate additional attacks, that's not really a problem anymore. Oh, another thing to mention is Haunter of the Dark. He actually ignores rend characteristics on weapons as well. So he has a 3-up save that ignores rend characteristics, and also has a 5-up save for any wounds or mortal wounds. So he's not only really tanky, but he's also really strong.
That sounds fantastic. He's got a lot of staying power. But it sounds like he might get aced out by massive hordes. He's just going to force him to make 100 saves. He's going to fail enough of them.
Yeah, I think the way to stop him is basically throw your wave of dudes at him and, just beat him with numbers. So that is it for death.
All right, let's move on. Destruction. I have no idea what these guys are about other than being like giants and green guys, and that's about it.
All right, so for destruction, we're going to focus on the Beastclaw Raiders. I have a guy in my group who plays this faction, and they are disgusting. You get enough of these stone horns, and they can just crank out mortal wounds. So
now, it's my understanding that with Beastclaw Raiders, it's not much of a debate between hordes or behemoths. It's really just all big guys all day.
Right. Yep. And that's what you're getting. You're putting all behemoths, all big guys on the table. And, we've debated within my own group with the Beastclaw Raider guy is where you're cranking out mortal wounds and you're doing sick damage and they're pretty resilient. But what you're sacrificing is your wound count. Right, so if you have 4 or 5 models at 13 wounds, and I'm bringing a Khorne horde with 160 wounds, that's a lot of wounds to chew through. But still, when you think about what the Beastclaw Raiders can do, for instance, they have what's called an earth-shattering charge. If the Frost Lord, within 12 inches of any enemy model, charges, basically it's an automatic D6 mortal wounds to any enemy unit within 1 inch. The other thing that makes them pretty resilient against the Horde is their Stone Skeleton ability. All damage and mortal wounds are halved, rounding up. So, yeah, they only have 13 wounds, but you have to consider all damage is halved. And they have a natural save of 3, and then multiple attacks. So these guys are just a death machine. But really, I think the strategy is you have to take your few big models and do as much damage as fast as possible, because they're not going to sustain the long term against a high wound army.
It sounds like those Beastclaw Raiders are really super ideal against elite armies. They probably hit the Stormcast pretty hard.
Yes, with their mortal wounds. As I talked about in a previous podcast, the question came up with Stormcast, what's their weakness? And you just hit the nail right on the head. It's mortal wounds. That's something that they don't defend against well. So the Beastclaw Raiders are very efficient at that.
For our Horde unit, I'm only going to pick one because, honestly, Destruction has quite a few ways to go here. I chose Auroch Ardboys because I really like one of the concepts that they have, because it kind of fits the theme of orcs and, fight to the death kind of thing. So for Ardboys, they are 30 of them for 450 points, which is pretty expensive. But they have 2 wounds apiece and a 4-up save. And one of the things that I like about them, which is the theme, if any of their models flee from the unit, you can roll a dice for them, and on a 6, they actually come back.
Did they get lost on their way out? They couldn't find the exit, so they decided to join the WOG again?
Well, basically, the ability is called Icon of Gork, and it's if you read it, it actually says if a model flees from a unit that includes any of these icons, roll a dice. On a 6, the standard bearer thumps the cowardly Auroch, and they come back to the fight and don't flee.
Hey, turn around.
On top of that, they also have Auroch Forged Shields, which is roll a dice before allocating a wound to a model with an Auroch Forged Shield, and then on a roll of 6, the wound is ignored. So these guys can actually stay around for a while despite being a horde. Seem like they go against the horde units die quickly mentality. They still have, if you have a WOG drummer, they get 2 to their charge rolls. If you have a standard bearer, they get 2 to their bravery, which their bravery is standard 6, so now their bravery 8. So now they stick around even more. And for either weapon, they're hitting on 4s, wounding on 3s, and then depending on the weapon you pick, they get either 2 or 3 attacks. They always do 1 damage, and sometimes they have rend, depending on the weapon. But I really just like the idea of a horde that isn't necessarily offensive-based or based on we're going to just poke you to death, but one that can actually kind of hold its grain and, doesn't just get wiped off of the board.
How about big guys for the Oruks? Do they have anything that really kind of beats the face in?
So for our big guy, there's a few options depending on your faction, but to stay within kind of the Iron Jaws allegiance, Gordrak is big and really hurts. He is a whopping 620 points, which is definitely the most expensive model on our list. But he definitely brings the pain, so I definitely think he's worth it. He is a 15 wound unit,